wanted to start out with a photo of my mother at work as a journalist. She was my role model and really the reason I'm in journalism still today. And she had moved around to a lot of different places, including managing editor of the Chicago Defender, which was where I had my first published work at age 10 in 1973. Fortunately, in 1984, my mom heard of a job at a newspaper called Gay Life. It was published by a man named Chuck Renslow, and he gave me my first break in journalism. I moved up the ranks and I was managing editor by the time I was 22. In alternative media, those of you from it know that a title really doesn't mean much. You pretty much do everything, including delivery and photography and nowadays video. The thing that I most remember from that era in the 1980s, of course, is AIDS and its devastation on our community. When I started at Gay Life, there were fewer than 100 cases of AIDS, and I would often take a photo of somebody and know that that was the photo we probably would end up using in a few weeks for their obituary. It was like a war zone, and it really put my feet to the fire as both a journalist and someone who knew that history had to be forced to remember these days. So what we were doing was some of the only documentation of some of the people that were impacted by AIDS during that era. I was one of 4 co-founders of Windy City Times newspaper, and you can see here the very first issue of Windy City Times. I wrote about the Mayor's Committee on Gay and Lesbian Issues. What strikes me in looking back at a lot of the stories that I've done over the years is how much things have changed and have not changed. Even though we've made great progress on LGBT issues, I look back on some of the stories, and certainly AIDS is still with us. It's still killing. We're still covering suicides and that epidemic within the youth and adult communities. We're still covering businesses that are discriminating against gay and lesbian people. We're absolutely still covering the issue of youth homelessness. Interpersonally, though, Windy City Times was a struggle, and most of us left in 1987 to start a publication called Outlines newspaper, and I was managing editor and publisher of Outlines newspaper for many years. We did a lot of different kinds of things at Outlines newspaper. We did a publication for 10 years called Black Lines, one called En La Vida. We merged those eventually into Identity. And then we had Nightlines, and we still have Night Spots, which is a bar guide. We did this business publication called Clout. And we just did all sorts of things just to figure out how to survive. And for me, it was always about how can we better serve our community and also survive financially. So in that era, I think some of my most important memories are covering the 1987 March on Washington, interviewing Mayor Harold Washington in his office, and once again meeting some amazing activists in the AIDS movement and the civil rights movement of 1980 Chicago. Oftentimes in alternative media you feel like you're wearing a hat of both an activist and a journalist. What I always have felt about journalism is objectivity is what you strive for, but it's also an unattainable goal. I really feel like I learned a lot of that in the alternative press in a way that I would not have learned in the mainstream press. Some of my favorite stories during the latter era of Windy City Times certainly have been covering President Obama. I was able to interview Obama when he was running for Senate. Outlines newspaper had interviewed him for a survey in 1996 that came up during the presidential election where he was supportive of marriage, so that kind of put us on a national map.